Hi there. Thanks for joining me on this video. I want to talk about the role of emotions in the workplace. And I realize that to some people that might be a very challenging topic because some people do seem to think that emotions belong at home, come to work and be a robot. I can't even count all of the ways that emotions are being neglected or actively downplayed in the workplace. We talk about emotional skills as soft skills. We talk about it, as something that's not really that relevant when it's the exact opposite. Emotions are absolutely crucial for our motivation and performance in the workplace. And in this video, I want to talk about why that is and what we can do about it in our workplaces. These are some of the topics I planned. I want to talk about all of the ways that science shows that emotions affect us at work, our performance, our motivation, our well-being. I want to talk about how denying the role of emotions usually backfires, often spectacularly. Um, and I want to talk about how we create workplaces where we acknowledge and harness emotions so they are not a hindrance, but an asset at work. And I'm going to give you some great examples from some of the workplaces that I've worked with around the world. If you have any questions, please write a comment. I love questions. I'll be happy to answer them. Um, but first of all, why are we even talking about emotions in the workplace? And I'll tell you why. There is a prevailing theory in economics called Homo economicus, which is the idea of the rational actor, right? It's this idea that whenever you make a choice about anything in your life, you do it based on the facts. You sit down and you make a rational decision. You sit about, you weigh all the pros and cons, and you arrive at a decision. Let's say you're buying a new car, right? You look at all the available brands, you look at the prices, you look at the features, you look at the specs, you look at the mileage. And then based on that, you make a purely rational, calculated decision which car is the optimal for you and your family. That is the prevailing theory in economics, and that theory uh, completely ignores the rule of emotions in the workplace or in life in general. I would say, um, which is dumb because emotions, we have them, and we have them at home and we have them at work. It's not like you can drive to work and park your car and then leave your emotions waiting in the car in the parking lot for you when you get off work. You're going to feel things in life and at work, and that's perfectly natural. But there is little to no discussion of this. I took some MBA courses, and there was no mention of anything emotional ever in these courses. It's like they buy in completely to the Homo economicus model that we're all just perfectly rational actors. And that is a huge, huge mistake, because what I've seen again and again, and what we know from the research, is that unacknowledged emotions in the workplace can completely derail a team or derail a project, can derail a meeting, and hurt our productivity and our motivation in so many ways. Have you ever been in a meeting where people clearly had strong emotions about something in that meeting, but could not acknowledge those emotions because emotions don't belong at work? You're supposed to be professional, and therefore the discussion got completely derailed into irrelevant facts, because people couldn't openly talk about the important thing here, is which was, how does this make me feel, this topic. I have seen that so many times, and it becomes so unproductive. Um, so we need, for that reason alone, we need to acknowledge emotions. But there's more to it than that. There's more to it than that. My favorite researcher in this whole happiness field is Ed Diener. And Ed Diener has done a lot of very, very interesting work on comparing satisfaction with affect. And in a psychologist talk, satisfaction is your rational, logical evaluation of your situation. On a scale from 1 to 10, all things considered, how satisfied are you with your job, for instance? Whereas affect is moment to moment. How do you feel right now? And there's positive effect, where you experience positive emotions, and negative effect, where you feel negative emotions, unpleasant emotions. Not negative emotions are not necessarily wrong; they just are unpleasant. Um, and Adina has found that those three components affect our well-being, right? Your satisfaction has an effect on your well-being, how many positive emotions you have, and how many negative emotions you have. And the more positive emotions, the better. The fewer negative emotions, the better. Yeah. And what he's found that I find super interesting is that many of the positive effects we want, like increased productivity, increased motivation, increased creativity come from having many positive emotions and fewer negative emotions, and less so from the satisfaction aspect. Satisfaction has it does affect how we perform at work, but it has less of an effect than our emotions do. Less of an effect. Our emotions affect our performance way more than our job satisfaction does in the workplace. Ed Diener's research on this is absolutely fascinating. So, how exactly does it affect us at work? Um, I think there are five main ways when I look at the research, and this is it. First of all, engagement and motivation. Um, there's a relatively poor link in the research between job satisfaction and job engagement or motivation, but there's a very strong link between positive effect and motivation and engagement. In fact, I would argue that in my view of things, motivation and engagement are emotions. You can feel engaged about your job, you can feel motivated about the work you do, or of course you can feel completely disengaged and demotivated. um, but I would also argue that at the core of engagement and motivation are emotions. A job that makes you feel good most of the time is a motivating job. You care about this job, you care about this workplace, you want to go the extra mile for the work and the customers. On the other hand, a job that constantly makes you feel bad, makes you feel belittled or stressed or frustrated or angry, how are you ever going to be motivated to do a good job if that's how work makes you feel all of the time? Um, and on top of that, motivation is also very much driven by the feelings we expect when we complete a task. There's a huge emotional component to motivation. If you expect to complete this task, you expect that when you complete this task, you will be recognized for it. You will feel proud of your work. Um, then you're motivated to do that task. On the other hand, if you know that you'll complete this task, you'll do a great job, and nobody will notice, and that'll make you really frustrated, then you're not motivated to complete a certain task. So in my view, you could argue that motivation and engagement are emotions, but they're certainly driven by emotions. They're hugely affected by your emotional state. So if we want our employees to be motivated and engaged, and I assume we do, we cannot ignore emotions. Second, creativity and innovation. There is a massive link between how you feel and how creative and innovative you are. And specifically, we know that when you feel good, your mind is more open. There is some fascinating research by Barbara Fredrickson. She calls it the broaden and build theory, where she basically argues that she's found in her studies that when you experience positive emotions, your mind is more open. It's more open to new input, more open to new ideas, more open to new people, for instance. So when you're feeling good, you're way more able to expand your skill set, come up with new ideas, and learn new things, and be creative. Um, Another piece of research on this is by Teresa Amabile in the book The Progress Principle, where she finds that she calls it people's inner work life, but it's the same thing. It's how work makes you feel, has a huge effect on their productivity, their learning, and their creativity and innovation, and their ability to come up with new ideas. So we know for a fact that if you want your employees to be to be creative and innovative, come up with new ideas, go along with new ideas, develop new ideas, then they do that way better when they're in a good mood, when they're having a good day, than when they're having a bad day. Um, Negative emotions can absolutely be a driver of creativity and innovation, but not sustainably and not in the long run. You can innovate a lot based on frustration, but I don't think that's going to be very sustainable and something that's going to have a good effect down the road. Teamwork. There is again our ability to work well together in teams, to work well together with others, to trust them, to like them, and to create good teams is hugely driven by our emotions. Again, if and I think there are two aspects to this. If you feel good, you are more open to making new connections, more trusting of other people. We know that from the research. And also, if other people make you feel good, right? If you're in a team and this team makes you feel valued, they make you feel seen, they make you feel respected, they make you feel acknowledged and valuable, then you'll want to be part of that team. You'll work well with these people. On the other hand, if a team makes you feel, again, stressed, frustrated, miserable, left out, isolated, alone, then you're not going to work well with these people. You're not going to trust them. You're not going to have good teamwork. So again, I fail to see how teamwork could ever be a rational decision, right? Well, I look at my team and I notice that we all have the right complementary skill sets, so I should probably work well together with these people. That is not how it works. Um, Powerful teams, teams that work really well, that is very, very much because these people feel good together. Yeah, we know that from the research. Learning, Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory. There are a million studies, both in workplaces and especially in schools, that show that when people are thriving, we learn faster. Again, our minds are more open to new ideas and input. Which is interesting because so many schools spend a lot of effort trying to make students feel bad. I think that is a huge mistake. And finally, decision making. Again, the Homo economicus theory. You may think that when you're picking a new car, you're doing it rationally based on the price point and the features. You are absolutely not. Your decision is the way. So what we know from the research is that you make the decision with your emotions. And then after that, you make up all the rational ideas where, I this car makes me feel good. And then you make up all the reasons why this is the correct car according to your model, according to your thinking. Probably the most interesting piece of research on this is from Daniel Kahneman, psychologist. He won the Nobel Prize. There is no Nobel Prize in psychology, so he won it in economics for exactly this, for showing how we human beings make decisions. And again and again and again, he found that we think we're rational actors, but we're absolutely not. I mean, it's not like every decision is either, completely emotional or completely rational. It's always going to be a mix, but our emotions play a much bigger role in our decision making than we like to acknowledge, and that most of us, think about. Um, I want to give you the scariest example from this book. He looked at court cases in Israel, and he found that he looked specifically at this is so scary. He looked at judgments that were given, court cases that were settled just before lunch or just after lunch, and then he looked at the average sentences. How harsh were they? And he found out that the average sentence just after lunch, given just after lunch, was way more lenient, and the average sentence given just before lunch was way more harsh. And you might think, wow, why on earth would that be? And the simple answer is the judges were hungry. And if the judge is sitting there, and their stomach is rumbling a little bit, and they're like, I could definitely eat something. Your blood sugar is low. You're a little annoyed. You're gonna look at the defendant. And you're gonna think that that person, that was a terrible crime they committed. I bet they're gonna do it again. Better give them a harsh sentence. And then right after lunch, you've had your lunch. You had a cup of coffee. You're relaxed. You're feeling good. You look at that defendant and you go, you know what, that person, that's a good person. They just made a mistake. We shouldn't punish them too harshly. If the Homo economicus model were true, it should make absolutely no difference what time of day the sentence is being handed down, right? But it turns out that it does, and that's because your emotional state and your physical state has a huge influence on your decision making. And there are so many studies on this. One of my favorites is people make way worse decisions when they really, really have to pee. That's not an emotion, but your physical status also affects how you make the decisions that you make. So, and again, we know from the research that when people feel good, they make better decisions. Their minds are more open to all of the facts. They can better consider all of the situations, the possible impact of whatever decision they're about to make. So people who feel good make better choices. They make better decisions. Specifically, we know that managers who are feeling good are better leaders because they make better choices better decisions for their teams. So in all of these areas, we know that feeling good makes you perform better, and that's of course the entire basis of our work, is that happiness at work and your performance is not about your job satisfaction. It's about your emotional state. So how do we deal with this in the workplace? What do we do about this? Well, it's kind of obvious, right? Let's have workplaces where we do more things that cause positive emotions. Yeah. And if you know our work at all, if you know, sorry, if you know our work at all, you know that our model for what causes positive emotions is results in relationships. It's not all the perk stuff. It's not massages and yoga classes and a gym in the office. It's results in relationships. Doing great work together with great people feels amazing. There's a ton of research to back this up. So if we as workplaces can make sure that people experience this every single day, that people go home from work and say, today I did great work together with great people, they're going to experience a lot of positive emotions, and that is going to boost their performance at work. um, how do we do this in practice? I've said this so many times, I'll keep repeating it forever. Positive feedback is like one tool. If you just want to introduce one tool in your teams and your workplaces that cause results in relationships, is positive feedback. Positive feedback, shows me that I do good work, but it also creates relationships because it shows that somebody sees me, somebody sees my good qualities, and somebody cares enough about me to tell me that I'm doing a good job. That is incredibly powerful for creating both results and relationships. Um, so creating more positive emotions, absolutely key. But the flip side, doing less of the stuff that causes negative emotions at work is equally important, maybe even more important. There is a very well-known, well-studied psychological phenomenon called negativity bias. That means that anything negative affects us more than anything positive. That's just the way it is. Somebody tells you something positive about yourself, and you're like, "Oh, thank you so much," and you kind of forget about it. But if somebody criticizes you, tells you something negative about yourself, you may remember that for weeks or months or years later, after that. So we know that negativity bias is a fact. We know that negative experiences affect us more than positive experiences. Um, so stopping anything negative at work, reducing anything that causes negative effects at work, negative emotions at work, is maybe even more important than causing more positive emotions. So what can make us feel bad at work? Well, the list is very, very nearly endless. I think it is infinite. There's no limit to, when I talk to people, the things that make them unhappy at work, make them feel bad. Anything from, somebody takes credit for your work, or you have a micromanaging boss, or you're constantly interrupted at your desk, or you have no work-life balance, or your coworkers don't listen to you, or you're in a meeting and they all shoot down your ideas every single time. There's no limit to all the negative potential things that can make people unhappy at work. So how on earth do we figure out what it is, and how do we so we can fix it, right? And I think the most important thing here is to listen to our employees' complaints and then act on them. That we have a process, a well-defined process for listening, asking our employees what is not working for you at work. What would you like to see differently? What is frustrating you? What's making your work days less fun? Those are super important questions. Of course, the answer might not be very pleasant, because it might be, if you're a boss and you ask your employees, the answer might be, it's you. You make my work days worse. But it's super important to ask these questions. It's super important to have a process for it. Because here's the thing, the perfect workplace does not exist, right? If you want to create a good workplace, it's not about eliminating every single problem, because you will never do that. There will always be problems. Every single workplace in the world has problems. But the good workplaces are just very good at identifying and fixing the problems they have. And in the bad workplaces, they know the problems are there, but they never do anything about them, which is insanely frustrating for employees. So we got to listen to employees' complaints, and we got to do something about them. Um, I saw a wonderful example a few years ago when I was doing a talk in South Africa. I visited a company called Quirk, a social media agency, and they had a whole process for suggestions and ideas and complaints. And they had an employee in charge of, uh, collecting these complaints and ideas and bringing them to upper management. And you can see in this picture, there's like a whole graph and structure for how to do this. And it could be anything from, the printer on the third floor is not working, or this is super annoying or whatever. It could also be ideas for improvements. But just the fact that you know that as an employee, if you see a problem, you know exactly what to do about it. You start this process, and the idea will be acted on very, very quickly. Every one of these ideas would be put before management, who could then either say, yes, we're going to fix it, or no, we sadly can't fix that right now. Here's why. So that's that. I think having some kind of process for collecting negative, what affects our employees negatively and doing something about it is massively important. That's why by the way, a little advertisement here. That's why we build it into Heart Count. Heart Count is the tool that I came up with for measuring happiness at work. It's amazing, best tool for measuring happiness at work. And what's also in Heart Count is a method for gathering feedback from employees. So every week when they fill out their 3-question surveys, very, very fast. There's also the option to say, is there something you want to tell management? And you can do it by name, or you can do it anonymously. And then that way you can gather feedback from employees and listen to what they're saying. And of course, you can gather data on what's, if something's making them unhappy, if people feel overloaded because they have too much work, or people feel ignored because they're not appreciated, or whatever. So Heart Count is definitely a tool where you can actively collect all of this data. And I just want to mention one reason why we absolutely need to act on these things that cause negative emotions is because this is not research based. This is my guess, but my guess is that stress and burnout at work they're not really caused by overworking people, or by having more workload than resources. In my opinion, in this, again, my guess is that that stress and burnout at work are caused by constant negative emotions. If you spend most of your time at work feeling stressed, angry, frustrated, or afraid, then over time you will burn out. On the other hand, let's say you're at work and you have an insane workload, but you and your team, you manage it well, you do the best you can, you support each other, then you probably won't burn out, because the workload itself is not what's causing the burnout. It's the feelings about the workload. Yeah. So if you have a high workload and you're constantly stressed about it, you're going to burn out. If you have a high workload, but you feel supported and it's fine and we're handling it, then you're not going to burn out. So that's another reason why we need to address causes of negative emotions in the workplace. In general, so we need to do more of the stuff that causes positive emotions and less of the stuff that causes negative emotions. But in general, we just need to make space for emotions at work. And in many workplaces, you don't. In many workplaces, showing frustration, showing anger could be close to career suicide. It could be something, that person could not be trusted. That person is weak. That person is not a professional. Could very well be the opinion they will form about you. And I think that's absolutely terrible, because emotions, we have them. Like I said, we're going to have them at work. We're going to have them at home. And if we try to hide them at work, it's actually likely to backfire. Why? Well, we know from the research that when we stifle negative emotions, we actually strengthen them. Yeah. So if you're seething angry about something, but you can't show it, that's not going to make it go away. Not being able to acknowledge that emotion, it's going to see there forever. It's going to strengthen that negative emotion. On the other hand, I just want to say that blowing up, if you're super angry, is rarely the answer. But the answer is that we do acknowledge our emotions. So when we stifle negative emotions, we strengthen them. And sadly, if we stifle positive emotions, we weaken them. Yeah. If you're happy at work and you're allowed to show it and share that happiness with others, it's going to strengthen it. Your happiness will affect them. If you're super happy at work, but you're not allowed to show it, you have to be serious and professional. Then that is going to weaken the impact of the positive emotions on you, and it's going to have no effect on others, because if you don't show it, it's not going to spread to other people as well. I want to show an example of somebody showing positive emotions at work to infect others. This is from Lego, where their previous CEO, Jørgen V. Knudstorp, he had gathered the entire world's financial press to the Lego headquarters in Denmark, because he wanted to announce that Lego had another record-breaking year, and he did it like this.
It is another record-breaking year, the best year ever for the Lego Group. So just like at the Oscars or just like in the movie theaters this last year, we are also dancing and singing and saying, everything is awesome, everything is cool when you're part of the team, everything is awesome when you're living in a dream. So it has been a great year.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That's when the Lego movie had just come out. So that's, everything is awesome. I think it's fantastic. So we need to create space for emotions at work. How do we do this? Well, first of all, we can ask people how they feel. Um, in a meeting, what do you, a very common question might be, what do you think about this? Which is great, is a good question. But we very rarely we ask, so how do you feel about this? How does this, this decision, how would that make you feel? This change, how does that make you feel? And those feelings, acknowledging them is hugely important, because if they are not acknowledged, they will affect us and they will backfire on us. So you can absolutely ask people how they feel about things, or how they feel in general. Hey, how do you feel right now? How does, you just came to a new team. How does that feel? Um, and then of course we can acknowledge the answers, the good and the bad. So if you ask somebody, what do you we're implementing this change, how do you feel about that? And they say, I absolutely hate it. That is valuable information. You may not agree, but you shouldn't dismiss it. You need to acknowledge that they have this feeling, and we need to proceed from there and say, okay, so why do you feel that way? What makes you feel like this? Is there something we can do about this to make you feel better about it? But asking people how they feel is super important. That's also the basis of heart count. Our tool for measuring happiness at work is not what people think about their job; it's what they feel about your job. How do you feel about your coworkers? How do you feel about your boss? How do you feel about your workload? And so on and so on and so on. And also, I think we need to allow displays of emotion. So if somebody is showing visible frustration in a meeting, for instance, if somebody looks really sad about something, if somebody looks really angry, that shouldn't be like cause for ostracism or criticism. It shouldn't make us think less about them. It should be something that we acknowledge as fundamentally human, as something all of us do, and as maybe even as healthy. Because if we can out loud show that we're angry or frustrated or afraid about something, then maybe others can help us deal with it better. Um, and again, and I just want to emphasize this point. Emotions are crucial, and we should not outlaw them from the workplace, because in my opinion, a workplace with no emotions is a workplace where nobody gives a damn. We want people engaged, we want people excited, and those are all emotions. And we can't have just the good. I know it's tempting to say, yeah, okay, you're allowed to bring emotions to work, but only the positive. That's just not gonna work. That is just not gonna work. And there are definitely people who are so skeptical of all emotions at work, both the good and the bad, both the happy and the unhappy. So that is my input on this. Let me check if there are any questions, and we will take those before we wrap up. Yes, there are two questions that came in. Hang on. Let me just get rid of this guy. Hang on. I just had them and now I lost them. Okay, so first question: why do you think emotions are so looked down on at work? And I think a huge there we are. And I think a huge reason for that is it's tradition. It's again, a lot of business thinking comes from economics. In economics, there are no emotions. But it also, let's face it, uh, workplace culture has been shaped by men for ages, for decades, for centuries. And a lot of what we have celebrated in our workplace has been the tough guy, the macho man, the decider, the boss, who is emotionless and professional, which of course they're not, but they have to pretend to be. And that has become tradition. That has become the way we do things. That has become the norm. And I think that's really, really sad. But it's just a fact that that is how it's seen. That becomes the norm. That becomes the way we're supposed to act. Um, And I think we need to change that. I think it's very, very unhealthy for us to spend, so much of our lives in workplaces we cannot acknowledge our fundamental basic human emotions. And then the other question that came in, and I had it right here. Hang on. Any recommendations or tips on how to work on one's emotional reactivity? I definitely agree that emotions are important. However, they should also be communicated appropriately accordingly. And yes, I think you can make a point for that, make a case for that. Again, for instance, it's been said that that blowing, if you're angry, blowing up and venting is healthy for you. Turns out not to be true. If you like vent like aggressively, if you're angry, it actually makes the negative emotion stronger, makes you even angrier. So there is something to be said for picking your time, right? But that being said, you're not always in control of your emotions, and that is part of what I'm saying. Is that if you're so angry that you burst out saying something in a meeting, maybe that shouldn't be career suicide. Maybe that's perfectly normal human behavior, and especially if you can apologize for it later. If something that happens at work makes you cry, maybe that's not the end of the world. Maybe that's perfectly normal human behavior and not even something you need to apologize for. Um, that being said, if you have very strong emotions about a topic, what you can do is step away from the situation before you have that outburst. Write down your thoughts. Here's what I think about this. Here's why I think it, and then communicate with the appropriate person at a later time. I think it was Aristotle who said that anybody can be angry, but the trick is to be angry at the right person at the right time. And I think there's something to that. That being said, emotions are there, and sometimes you need to express something, and sometimes it's the right thing to do. Um, I once worked with a client who did not seem to respect my work at all. Every time I made one suggestion, they'd be like, "Fine," and then they'd change it later. And finally, I got so frustrated that I blew up in the middle of a meeting. I'm like, "You cannot keep doing this. If you keep changing everything, we're never going to get anywhere." And from that moment on, I had their respect. That completely changed my working relationship with this client. And from then on, they listened way more attentively to what I was saying. So there again, emotions belong in the workplace, and we need to find ways to make that happen. And I hope this video gave you some tips for how to do it. Stay happy.